Hey you guys, it's me Anshika. Welcome back to my channel. And in today's video, as you can tell from the title already, I'm going to be talking about the SAT. And this video is a very highly requested one. So many people have been asking me about this. So finally I decided to make a video on how to prepare for the SAT in a month, and also talking about some of the mistakes that I made while preparing for my SAT, some things which I could have done differently, which probably would have led to a higher score. So without further ado, let me start with all the things I have to say about the SAT. All the flowers in my garden never look. Okay, so let me start with preparing for the SAT. So ideally you should give the SAT during your junior year, and not postpone it till your senior year, because senior year is very jam-packed with submissions and college applications and things. So ideally try to plan out your preparation and other things in such a way that you're able to give if you need to give 2 or 3 attempts, all of them should be done in junior year itself, instead of letting them sit and then just doing it in senior year. Book a test center well in advance. So for me, my school was also a test center, but because of that, it used to get booked pretty quickly. The moment registration would open, people would register, and then even if you tried to book like a month before the exam, you wouldn't get a seat. And then it was a long process to find a different school or something like that. So if you want to get the test center which is closest within a reasonable distance of where you live, I would suggest at least like 2 months before you plan on taking the test, book a test center, register yourself, pay the fees, and be done with it. Okay, the third thing here is to commit to your test date. Now a lot of people, like in my friend circle, people I know, ended up postponing their test dates. So the SAT does allow, the college board rather does allow you to push back your SAT date during a certain period. Like I think it's up to like 20 days before the exam or something like that. I'm not very sure, but I would highly suggest that you don't do this. If you decide, okay, I'm going to give my test on, for example, 20th August, commit to that, and only when you commit to that date mentally, you'll be able to prepare properly. If you keep thinking about postponing it, or not preparing for it because you can just give it on a later date, chances are you'll end up postponing it one more time. And also, this is just a personal observation, people who postponed their test date ended up doing worse off on their new date. So if you're serious about getting a good score, commit to your test date as early as possible. Okay, now that you're done with the preparing for the SAT part, coming to the resources. So this is something which I think a lot of people either go overboard on or do too little of. Some people don't use enough resources, they just rely on either one book or just watch some videos. And there's some people who go overboard and buy like 3 books for maths, 3 books for reading. You don't need to do all that. I used 2 books to prepare. One was the Princeton Review 2021 SAT book, and the second was the official 2021 SAT study guide, which will also be up on the screen. This was the only 2 books I used, and it worked pretty well for me. There are a lot of other books that I researched which target specifically either the reading and writing section or the math section, which I will link in the description if you guys want to check them out. I will link the books that I have found to be the best from my research and from talking to people who have used them. However, I think that for most students, at least students who've done CBSE till class 10th, because I did CBSE till class 10th, I think you wouldn't need any separate book to prepare for the math section, because the SAT math section is pretty easy. It's quite basic concept which you would have covered by grade 10 definitely. So you won't need to prepare extra for it if you have like a score of more than 90% on your CBSE 10th maths exam. But if you're already weak in maths and you feel like that's an area where you could struggle, or while you do the past papers you see that you're struggling, then obviously you should go and buy a book separately to focus on that. One resource which everybody should use while preparing for the SAT is Khan Academy. Firstly, because it's free. Always take advantage of free resources. It has a ton of like practice exams, it has video lessons, and it has time management tips and a bunch of things on their page, and it's all official SAT practice. Third thing that I'm gonna say here is use your school library. So for most schools, the library would have the latest SAT and ACT material. So this is something which you should, again, when you're like 2 to 3 months before your test date, when you've booked your test center and you've committed to your date, you should start scouring your library shelves for material for preparing for the SAT. A tip here would be to do this as early as possible, just because there's obviously limited copies of all the books and the past papers and such that they have available, and lots of people want to use them. So often they might be borrowed, or there might be a waiting queue for people who want to borrow them, so you won't get them within time, and then you just have to buy those when they're already available. So now coming to the third thing, once you've acquired your resources and done all your basic like preparation for taking the test, how do you actually start studying for it? Now this is where a study schedule and study routine comes into play, and I feel like I say this a lot on my channel, but the minute you perfect your study schedule, you're automatically set up for success, because a good study schedule makes studying a habit instead of something you have to do forcefully. The minute studying for the SAT becomes a habit, you're going to do it on autopilot mode without having to force yourself to get up and do it. You're just going to have it like in your brain, like, okay, it's 5 p.m, it's time for me to do SAT reading, and you sit down and start doing SAT reading without even realizing that you've built a study habit. So have a good study routine. Now again, here I'll mention Khan Academy, because Khan Academy has a bunch of model study routines based on how far away you are from the exam, which should really help you out as a starting point for how you should model your study routine around your own schedule. Another thing here is that you should take a couple of online SAT tests right after you commit to your testing date. Take a couple of online tests just to see where you stand and how much work you need to put in, and where you should focus your attention. Is it on the reading and writing section? Is it on the math section? Also within those, if you can identify what subtopics you need to work on, that's even better. My own study plan looked something like this, where basically I used to do full length timed tests on Fridays and Saturdays every week, and on Sundays I would take around 3 to 4 hours to cover all of the topics that were in the book that I was using, which was the Princeton review book, as I mentioned earlier, and work on the skills that I messed up in the tests that I took on Friday and Saturday. So I would correct them, and I would work on the things that I got wrong. During the other days of the week, I would just do Khan Academy video lessons and exercises from the book, or like make notes, or look at all the strategies and tips that they'd given in the book, or watch videos of people talking about how they scored high and what tips and strategies they used. This would only be around an hour each day, so not that much if you think about it. And then once I made this routine, another tip here is for you to sit in the same spot that you sit in every time while practicing. So I had a specific place where I would sit while taking my SAT full length tests. I had a particular notebook where I used to write down my notes and do all my math calculations and such things. So once you like start doing that, sitting in a particular place, using a particular notebook, using a particular pen, that kind of also helps you get into the autopilot mode of studying. The minute you sit in that place and have those materials in front of you, your brain is programmed to think about SAT and about studying. So that's something that you should definitely try out. Okay, now that you've done all this and you've acquired your resources, you've made a study routine, you're starting to do your practice tests and other things, how do you maximize your output from each practice test? Like, how do you make the most of it? So for this, I have 5 things to say. First one being target specific skills. Now, for me, like during the weekdays from Monday to Thursday, when I would use my book or use Khan Academy video lessons to revise or recap certain topics, I used to try and use those skills that I learned during my practice tests on Friday and Saturday. So if I learned a skill for how to be faster in the reading section, I would actively try to apply that thing while I was doing the test. So focus on building specific skills like that. Second thing is, for the math section, you have a calculator section of the exam. Identify what calculators are allowed in it. If you don't have that calculator, buy it beforehand. Don't leave it like the night before the exam. Buy it beforehand and practice with it even at home, instead of using like your mobile calculator or using something else to calculate your answers. Use the calculator you intend to use in the exam. Third thing is build speed and accuracy. Now the only way to build speed and accuracy for the SAT or for any other exam for that matter is to practice, practice and practice. You're gonna want to practice so that you can answer as many questions as accurately as possible, and also so you have some amount of time left to revise or recheck the questions that you're doubtful on before the time for that particular section runs out. Fourth thing here is to mark your tests and write why the answers you had were wrong. So the Princeton review book that I used, for all the answers they also gave how to get to the answer, like they gave the process of elimination, or they gave the direct calculation on how to obtain the correct answer. So whenever I would get an answer wrong, I would put a little post-it note there and write down how to achieve the correct answer. That's something that you should do as well to maximize the skills that you gain from each study session. Is when you mark your practice tests, not only write that option B was incorrect and option A was correct, why was option A correct, and how should you have approached the question. You should put that all on post-it notes, and then write like a week or a couple of days before the exam. You can go through all those post-it notes and see the places where you went wrong and just revise those methods. The last thing here is to use a different color pen for marking. So for me it was red, as red has always been the colors my teachers used to correct my notebooks and things like that. So I would use a red pen to mark all the tests that I did, and I would write down, I would place like those little post-it flag things that you get. I would place them on the pages where I made silly mistakes and write down things such as don't do mental calculations. If it was that I did mental maths and got an answer wrong, I would write that down on a small flag so that I would always remember not to make that mistake again. So these are some things how you can maximize your productivity, and you can get the most out of less time spent studying. Instead of sitting for 6 hours, you sit for 3 hours, but you do as much work as you would have done in 6 hours. Okay, now that you've done all this thing, the fifth thing that I'm gonna address, which a lot of people would have DM'd me about if I didn't address this right now, is motivation. How do you get motivated to even do all of this? Okay, so the first thing is, as I said earlier, motivation. The first motivation will be from your study routine. If you've made a perfect study routine that works for you, if you've stuck to it for like a week or 10 days, automatically your motivation becomes your study routine. It internally drives you to sit and study even when there's no specific external motivation to do so. Second thing is, find different forms of motivation. So it can be for me, I used to watch these SAT result reactions videos where people would get high scores, and they would react and they would be so happy, and their parents would be happy. That I would see that, and then I would be like, okay, I want to do this too. So that's just what worked for me. Another thing that works for me, not only for the SAT but for other things as well, other exams as well, is to put on some study with me video, like real-time study with me videos while I'm studying, just so it feels like I'm studying with somebody else, but they also can't disturb me because they're in a screen. Another thing that I've heard a lot of people doing, which I also did for my IB exams but not for the SAT, is to write your goal score down on a post-it note and place it like on your laptop or on your SAT study guide or even on your mirror or something like that. The last thing that I can say for motivation, which is something that I did as well, is to have a countdown till your SAT date. So I did this on my physical calendar as well as on my iCalendar on my Mac. So I put like a D minus 30 days, D minus 29 days, that kind of countdown for each day, just so I would constantly be, thinking about how many days are left, and that would also be a form of motivation to, get to work if I wanted to get a good score. Okay, the last thing that I'm going to talk about, which is also, as I mentioned, I made a couple mistakes. So this is the mistake that I made, is I relied too much on my second attempt. So for those of you who plan on giving the SAT more than once, I would highly suggest to get that mindset, just get it out of your brain and throw it in the dustbin. Don't be thinking about your second attempt, because invariably, even if you're not trying to do it, you're going to mentally start relying on your second attempt and not take your first attempt seriously. This is a big mistake, because if you do well on your first attempt, you won't have to waste the money to do a second attempt. I made this mistake, and for my graduating batch, the SAT was test optional due to COVID. So that also kind of got into my head, where I was like, oh, even if I don't get that good of a score, it's fine, I guess, I just won't submit it. Which was another mindset that I should have just thrown into the dustbin, but I did not. That was the mistake I made. I could have gotten above 1500 in the first attempt itself, but I kept it in my brain that I'm gonna have to do it a second time anyway. It affected my performance, and I ended up getting a 1480 on my first attempt, where I got I believe 720 for the reading writing and 760 for the math section. And then finally in the second attempt, I got my stuff together, I got into the correct mindset, and I got a 1500 with 800 in math and 700 in reading writing. Now my reading writing score dropped in my second attempt. The reason being, I had by this time already figured out what universities I was going to apply to, and I knew that the ones where my SAT score would matter were all universities where they super scored, meaning they would take the best of the math and the best of the reading writing section from all my attempts. So I was pretty okay with having a 720 reading writing score, but I wanted to increase my math score, so I focused more on math when I was preparing for my second attempt. So I got a perfect 800 on math in my second attempt, and 700 for reading writing, which super scored, made it a 1520. So that's the score I submitted to colleges, is a 1520 out of 1600, which was good enough to get me to all the places I wanted to get into. But I definitely could have gotten a higher reading writing score as well. I just made the mistake of not focusing on that, which is something that you guys shouldn't do. Don't let your focus go so much on one section that you don't focus on the other and let it slip, because the total score combines both of them, so you want to do well on both of them. Last thing I'm going to say, don't take too much pressure. Now this is another thing which I feel like affected my result, especially during the first attempt, was that I constantly kept thinking about getting like above 1500, and just pressure from my parents kept asking me like, oh, are you prepared or not, and I kept listening to other people's stories of how people had to give the SAT 3 times and things like that, and the SAT is expensive. So that kind of got into my head and messed me up. So don't let that happen to you. Don't take too much stress for things which are out of your control. Just focus on building speed and accuracy and using all the strategies I talked about, and you will be good to go, and you will not have to take much stress for how much you score and things like that, and like impressing your parents or your teachers or whatever it is. So those were all the tips that I have to give for the SAT, and I am pretty sure that if you follow all of these religiously and don't make the mistakes I did, then you can get a 1500 plus even by preparing for just a month or a month and a half 45 days is enough time, in my opinion, to prepare for the SAT, especially if you're already familiar with the maths concepts, as most people who are in grade 11 would be. I hope you guys get something out of watching this, and if you do use any of these tips and they work out for you, do let me know which tip worked best for you and how much you scored. And thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe and help me grow this community, and I will see you again on Monday with another video.
Like a happy child, watching